Jazakallah khair for all of your understanding. Jazakallah khair. All right, so then without further ado, Sister Salah, if I'm good to go, then inshallah, I'll go ahead and begin, inshallah.
Absolutely. Thank you so
All
much.
right, Jazakallah khair. So, Bismillah, Bismillahi wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. Jazakallah khair, all of you, for being here once again on our final day of our seminar. So hopefully, inshallah, I hope that it is just as beneficial as the others have been. And inshallah, we benefit from whatever is being mentioned today as well. So to kind of continue from where we had left off last time, right? So since there's a lot of things that we need to accomplish today, I want to just get right into it. And so last time we had talked about free will and determinism, and we examined this from an Islamic theological lens. But is there a way that we can examine this concept through a scientific lens, right? Is qada and qadar something that we can discuss in scientific terms? And so obviously the answer to that would be towards with genetics, right? Genetics, because genes determine a lot of what happens within our bodies, right? It's something that is determinant in a way, right? So let's explore this question of what is the scientific perspective on genetic determinism. So in the discussion of qada and qadar, the essence of it is related to human behavior, right? Actions that one carries out. So whether those actions are determined or chosen, but if we look in terms of scientific perspective as well, we can look at that aspect of behavior in two ways. First and foremost, we can look at this question of, are we genetically determined, right? We have to first define what genetic determinism actually means, right? So genetic determinism on an individual level, it is a belief that our physical human traits that correspond to behavioral traits, right, like personality, intelligence, social attitude, even mental conditions, are all determined by our genetic makeup. And we all know that genes are our building blocks of life, right? They're the basic components of each of our DNAs. And so, similar to like a recipe book that gives instruction on how to make a dish on each page, you'll see that our genes similarly have that same understanding, right? Where our genes are going to be what codes for everything that is within us. And so similarly, like when we look at each page of a recipe book, right, we see that, okay, it gives us instructions, the ingredients that are needed, and in order to make that product, right? In the same way, when we have DNA and we have our specific genes, that specific gene or a segment of it will correspond to a specific protein, and those proteins then correspond to certain functions, right? Whether it's nervous system functions or digestive system functions, right? They also correspond to traits, right? Like eye color, hair color, etc. So genes do dictate many aspects of the human being. Now, the question that arises is, do we have genes that pinpoint our behavioral traits, right? So again, we're making that connection that between qada and qadar and the scientific understanding is this link of behavior, right? And so do genes pinpoint behavioral traits like temperament, right? In our discussion, especially when we presented the topic of to our students, we should always bring it back to epistemology, right? And make it a habit to grade the truth level of statements to our students so that way they can put the things in perspective. So that brings me to the second question. Is the claim that we are genetically determined scientifically certain? Is it qadari? Okay. So in order to answer that question, let's look at this spectrum, right? So when we look at how genes correlate with traits or behaviors, we see there's a variety of ways in which this correlation can take place, right? There's one gene that can be associated to just one trait, right? A direct correlation. And there's also genes in which there's one gene that has been located that will result in many traits, right? Or associate with many traits of the human being. Then there's also many associated genes that can translate into just one trait, right? And then obviously many genes can associate to many traits as well. And another key correlation is multifactorial correlation or association, where many genes interact with the environmental factors, and then they're going to then correlate and result in many traits, right? So when we look at this connection, right, we see that links from genes to behavior is going to be a multifactorial association, right, which can also vary in degree based on environmental factors. So when we look at this, we can take a few examples, right? Now, the other thing that to note is that these associations have been analyzed as part of a more complex pathway, right? When we're talking about genes being transcribed and translated, there's more that affect that transcription and translation, which is called epigenetics, right? And I hope I'm not going too far into biological terms for those of you who are Islamic studies teachers, but the basics of how genes work we'll have to review in biology classes, just so that way students are on the same page and understanding that and how gene expression works. And then this would be an add-on to that discussion, inshallah. So when we're talking about the epigenetics, right, the epigenome is actually where there's chemical tags that are attached to the genome itself, which then affect the way it's expressed, right? So when the gene is expressed and transcribed, then it can either boost that transcription, right, and increase that interaction or whatever the results might be, or it can interfere with that as well, right? Either decreasing it or turning off that gene expression completely, right? So the epigenome interaction between genes and the environment, which can be affected by diet and chemical exposure and medications, this is going to be a very integral part in this discussion as well. So let's take the example of twins, right? If you have twins that are identically the same DNA, right? And well, that's what the definition of twins is, right? And they're exposed to various lifestyle choices and different environmental factors that's going to affect their epigenome. This will cause differences in their behavior. It'll cause differences in the way that they age, their susceptibility to disease, right? And just their lives in general. And so you'll see here that even though the DNA might be exactly the same, this epigenetics is going to have a vast and major difference in effect in the way that these lives end up, right? Even things like social interactions also cause epigenetic changes that affect the person not only lifelong, but these epigenetic traits can actually be passed on to their offspring as well, right? So epigenetics is not part of the DNA sequence itself, but it's beyond the genetics. And so studies show that epigenetics has a considerably strong influence on us, and it has now become the focus of many research studies. So to understand this correlation of how our genetics works with behavior, let's take this first scenario. So in this first scenario, we see Mr. A tells the judge, "Your Honor, my genes made me do it." And so how can we relate the concept of genetic determinism to the concept of mukallaf, right? We discussed last time, mukallaf is a person who is now responsible and accountable for their behavior. And so what do you think, would you agree with this statement first and foremost, right? I'd like you guys to go ahead and interact so that way we can kind of get some, not just silent listening, but some interesting understanding. Oh, subhanAllah, Sister Javeria mentions, I have an identical twin sister and epigenetics is evident in both of us. SubhanAllah, right? And honestly, subhanAllah, learning becomes so effective when it becomes practical and personal, right? So this concept of epigenetics is probably something that you can definitely relate to and be able to see within your life and your sister's life, subhanAllah. So would you guys agree with this statement, right? This statement of that your genes made you do it. Well, let's get into it a little bit further. Let's see. Let's see if there's more understanding than this, right? So if we look at the evidence, right, with and this association between genes and criminal behavior, scientists have mentioned that they see that a person for which has aggression in them, they noticed a higher levels of serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter. And so when they saw these higher levels of serotonin, they looked at that mechanism, right? And so they said the mechanism of this aggression is an altered monoamino oxidase enzyme, and that leads to higher serotonin levels, right? And so that those higher serotonin levels then leads to aggression. And so many scientists and researchers also don't agree, like as many of you have mentioned just now, that this association is not something that can be acceptable, right? They say that those with aggression might have had high levels of serotonin, but not the other way around. Not everyone with high levels of serotonin will act aggressively, right? It's like saying a person with a knife is going to be a criminal, right? Just because you have a knife does not mean that you're going to be a criminal. It depends on what you do with that knife, right? Will you cut fruit with it or will you hurt someone with it? But just because a person who has killed had a knife and now you have a knife, it doesn't mean that you will kill with it, right? So the evidence of high levels of serotonin leading to aggression is actually very weak, right? So they would say that this association is a weak association. And it's nothing but that. It's just an association. It's not causal, right? So when we look at this based on the evidence, how would you then grade the truth level of this association or correlation? Would you all say that this is qat'i or is this dhanni? Very good, right? So this would be a dhanni, right? Because again, this is in the realm of only possibility. So let's look at another scenario to take this further. Now, let's look at scenario number two. Scenario number two here is talking about when there is a public debate. Mr. K argues that same-sex attraction is predisposed in my genes. Okay, so this is his claim. Now let's look at this claim and the truth level of this claim. So there's been a study that was done of 500,000 people by the UK Biobank and concluded that there is actually no single or specific gene that is associated with same-sex attractions. They found in some associations, about 8 to 25%, that had some correlation, but they weren't able to pinpoint a specific gene or even a location on the genes that would associate or cause such behavior. And then if we look at it Islamically, right, we would say that there can be some inclinations in a person, in their heart, in their mind, but there's no consequence for that inclination, for having that inclination, right? And we talked about those the last time. And so the consequence comes when action is taken upon that inclination, right? That's where then action on that inclination can then result in sin. So if we look at this now, based on that evidence now that we see that there is a very, very weak, or if not any tangible or sufficient association here, would we say that this correlation of genes leading to behavior would be qat'i or dhanni? Absolutely, right? So Allah, since Allah has given us that consciousness, ability to decide, right, which choice to make and what action to take, right, we would say this in this terms, right? We would become mukallaf, right? We would be mukallaf in making that decision, right? Based on our personal situations, and that this association would be a dhanni, right? Now, just commenting on, there was one of you guys had mentioned that you were interested in learning about gender transition as well, right? And finding out how to discuss that in Islamic settings as well. But just to make a comment in relation to that, when we would say that our genes actually would prove otherwise, right? So because we have an X and Y chromosome and our genes are very clear cut in expressing gender, right? You'll see that usually when in discussions about gender transition, genetics is usually not brought up, right? Because it would be a lost argument. Usually the argument that is brought up is going to be feelings and the way that a person, whatever whispers that they are susceptible to. So that's a note that I just wanted to present, so that way it's something that we can keep in mind and touch upon the things that you guys had mentioned that you were interested in learning in. Now, just to summarize now, the scientific view of genetic determinism. So here, we would actually categorize aspects of genetic determinism in two categories, right? Full determinism and partial determinism. And the argument that even scientists agree with is actually partial determinism, right? That it's not everything is cut and dry in your genes, but there's levels. And remember, as we mentioned, the interaction between genes and behavior is very complex, and it's very, very multifactorial as well. And we'll also have that ability now to even edit our genes, right? So that even shows more ability to choose what happens and how we carry out our behaviors, right? And in terms of when we're talking about crime and same-sex attractions, right, the evidence of genetic determinism is not conclusive and actually very uncertain. And then we can also say the scientists differ on whether our actions are deterministic or not, right? Or whether we have free will or not. And so because of the elements of uncertainty in the laws of nature, right? The fact that we don't know everything about it, scientists have also been very hesitant to say that there are things that are very deterministic. And actually, the scientific conclusion and the Islamic conclusion on determinism and free will are very closely related in some regard, right? That both state that we have a level of free will and some elements that are determined. And therefore, both views say that both determinism and free will does indeed exist. The difference, though, is that the Islamic theology aspect on determinism and free will is qat'i, right? Because of the revelatory text that we have in terms of it. Whereas the scientific aspects are going to be dhanni because there is no definitive answer or conclusion. Okay. So any questions on genetic determinism? Okay, so alhamdulillah. So what we're going to do if there are no more questions is then inshallah we will go ahead and move on to our second discussion of today. And so for today's discussion on the next aspect that we are going to discuss is the last unit, which is within the curriculum. And this last unit, which is within the curriculum, is going to be, are human beings unique in the universe? Okay, so when we're talking about this concept of being unique in the universe, we also have to think about this, the scientific aspect as well as the theological aspect of it, right? So when we're looking at this, we are going to use this actually as a template. Okay. What I would like for you guys to understand with this understanding of extraterrestrial life and this exploration that we'll be going into is that this is actually more of an example, right? What I really want you guys to look through when we're covering this concept is how inquiry it actually happens with novel topics, right? So when there is some aspect that a person wants to or a scientist wants to discover or look into and examine, I want you guys to think about, and we'll discuss about it, of why inquiry into a specific topic is even done, right? So keep this in mind, right? The extraterrestrial understanding is, or the example is just kind of the face of the discussion. But what I really want to discuss here is how inquiry is actually done, right? The process of it and the concepts behind it, okay? So let's begin on our discussion for this next session. So we discussed human exceptionalism, right, in our evolutionary discussion, and we explained that humans are unique in this world, right? They're set apart from other creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, other creatures that exist in this world. But what about the universe? Are we unique in the universe? So when we look at this understanding, we see that, let's see here. Sorry about that. Okay, so I wanted to zoom out just a little bit before we get into that discussion, right? So what we need to begin with is, what are the motivations for us, right? Perhaps as scientists, as teachers, as students, as scholars, or even just as Muslims, to actually pursue a specific field of inquiry or discovery, right? We should wonder, why do scientists ask the questions that they ask, right? Why would our questions as Muslim scientists be different compared to a non-Muslim scientist, right? And we should really look at how or why even resources are allocated to a specific inquiry, right? Because that can really play a difference and an impact in how inquiry is done, right? If some scientists or the company that they work for are motivated primarily by money, right, we would frown upon that, because money is not the best motivator for beneficial or even neutral outcomes, right? And so when we look at this discussion of what is our motivation in determining whether or not extraterrestrial beings exist, right? I want you guys to think about it, right? Any ideas of what would be the motivation for us to learn about this topic? Right? Why did scientists even ask this question to begin with? Why would it be important to them? Or even what would be the motivation for Muslim scientists to see whether extraterrestrial beings exist or not? Because for us as Muslims, right, our intentions matter. We should always think about what is our intention in pursuing a specific type of inquiry. So any thoughts of why would we even consider this question? Have any of you ever wondered, right, why these, or whether extraterrestrial life exists or not, right? There's a lot of like sci-fi movies and things like that on extraterrestrial life and these possibilities of things existing. Sure, right? So as the brother mentioned, that it could be for us to reflect on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation, but we have a lot of other things to reflect on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation as well, right? It could be another added aspect. Well, let's see. Okay, so let's move forward further in our discussion. So what is extraterrestrial beings or extraterrestrial life, right? So we would say, again, we have to define our term so we would understand what we're even talking about, right? So extraterrestrial life is defined as life that may exist or may have existed in the universe outside of the Earth, right? Terrestrial would be earthbound, extraterrestrial would be outside of the Earth. And an extraterrestrial intelligence is defined as a hypothetical extraterrestrial life that is capable of thinking and conducting purposeful activity, right? So this is where the question of mukallaf would be, right? Would these extraterrestrial beings be mukallaf? Would they be accountable for their actions? And then the last term here that I want you guys to know is astrobiology, right? Astrobiology is also known as exobiology or xenobiology. It's a multidisciplinary field dealing with nature, existence, and the search for ETIs, right? Life beyond this earth. And astrobiology actually encompasses areas of biology, astronomy, as well as geology. Now, so before we get to the next point, which I am going to share with you a short clip, I would like you guys to ask this question or answer this question, right? What do you think? how many of you have ever asked this question about extraterrestrial life, right? So what I want you guys to do is, as I play this video, first reflect on, what do you think, whether extraterrestrial life exists or not? And what is your evidence for thinking so, right? So think about that as I turn on this video for us to think. Explore and find evidence of how life came into existence. Okay, so perhaps extraterrestrial life can also help us to understand how life came into existence on this earth, to get a better understanding of the creation of Adam and Islam, and perhaps related to jinns. Oh, very interesting. So what I'd like to do is, I would like to share this short clip and then come back to this discussion of whether extraterrestrial life exists or not. And also examining, what do you think is proofs of whether that is true or not.
If there's life on those planets, or those early forming planets, they're not if there's life on those.
Okay, so I would like to hear your thoughts. What do you guys think about what he's presenting? Ideas? Thoughts?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum
The scientist is saying that since there are planets and stars that are billions of years older than our solar system, and they might have planets where there is atmosphere that can support life.
Mm-hmm.
If there was life evolved in there, then it happened billions of years ahead of us. So it is a possibility that there is life outside our solar system.
Very interesting. Absolutely. Right. So now, again, think about the terms in which we're discussing this, right? So first, I wanted to ask you guys, did your view change after viewing this, right? I mean, perhaps you didn't think of it. Do you think of that it's perhaps more of a possibility now or less of a possibility now? Right. So
I always thought that it is a possibility to have other life forms in the whole universe, because we see very little of the universe, and we have not been to even Mars. And for example, the Quran says the jinns are made of fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just making example. Venus or Mercury are very hot planets. We cannot imagine living there as human beings, but if someone is made of fire, they could actually live there, right? Their life could evolve around in a planet like that. So only Allah knows what other kind of creations He has created. So it is possible.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder, like, it's such a big and vast universe. It cannot be just for us. Otherwise, it's I don't
right.
know.
That's a very interesting perspective, because inshallah we'll get into a little bit of the revelatory understanding of this as well. But you're right. But at the same time, we also know that jinn live amongst us on this earth as well, right? Even though they were created from fire. So there's a lot of things, interactive or interlinked things here to discuss. But I really appreciate, Sister Farhana, your thoughts on this, because you're right. I mean, there's a whole lot that could be out there. But coming to some of the things that we've been discussing in our seminars is that we have to also examine what is the level of certainty that we know about this information, right? So when we're talking about in these huge numbers of billions and millions and trillions, right? There's a great deal of uncertainty there, right? So we're looking at things with a lot of assumption, right? And so we're assuming that all of this information, or the information that they're presenting, is accurate, right? Now, so we have to understand that many scientific endeavors, if not all, have, and even statistical analysis, usually and fundamentally are based on certain assumptions, right? So what is the level of chance or probability that this is true or false? Or what is the chance that something happened or didn't happen or will happen in the future or has happened in the past? All of this is actually up to chance, right? Chance is a standard in scientific inquiry, right? Now, obviously from a theoretical understanding, right, or a theological understanding, sorry, a theological certainty will change our understanding of how much chance plays a role in this question, right? So if we have some sort of theological proof, then we can say, well, that's not chance. We might know certain things certainly, right? قطعي. But in this discussion, according to even the scientific realm in this view, right, we're talking about very lunny terms, right? Now, the other thing to consider is the evolution of what we consider to be true, right? So when we're looking at the concept of evolution, right, things change over time. So there's also an evolution of truth, right? Over time, the question is, do we get closer to truth or do we get further away from the truth? Now, when we're looking at technological innovations, right, we get better than the past versions, right? The newer version is going to be better than the older version. In scientific innovation, it's supposed to work similarly, right? Where the research should lead us to a better understanding of things. Now, there's also evolution in morals and ethics of what is considered good and bad, right? Today, much of the evolution in science also involves the moral belief people hold, right? What is good in the mainstream now could be very different than what was good 100 years ago or will be 100 years from now. So when we look at this aspect, right, we see that we have some evolution in the truth and our moral ethics. Now, again, like I said, scientific advancements are more physical and empirical based, right? So they're going to be based on the dunya or the parameters of this world, okay? So in their terms, then latest means better, right? And obviously that truth is going to evolve in lieu of new research, right? So society and the cause and effect witnessed empirically in this world determines what we think is moral or ethical, okay? Now, as Muslims, though, we can examine if truth evolves and what parts of that truth evolves. We can look at primarily revelational context, right? So from the content of our revelational text, we can look at what is moral and ethical and determine that way, right? What parts of life in society can evolve would be determined by its implications in the akhirah, right? So we would say this is akhirah bound implications, where scientific advancements were dunya bound implications, right? So what effect or consequence would we incur in the hereafter by taking a certain route, right? Either it will be punished or rewarded, right? So this is something to keep in mind. As Muslims, a Muslim solution to the issues of the world or aspects of inquiry are going to be actually universally beneficial. And this is really important for students to understand, right? When we share with them, we should mention that Muslim solutions should be universally beneficial, right? It would be beneficial for this dunya as well as the akhirah, right? So let's take, for example, the removal of alcohol from society, right? It benefits Muslims because obviously we're eliminating a haram from society, right? Removing that, even that avenue of falling into something that would be sinful or punishable, right? But similarly, the non-Muslims also benefit because you're removing alcohol from society and you're distancing them from the harmful effects that they would have in this world as well, right? So there would be perhaps no more drunk driving accidents, right? So we understand that the way that a Muslim looks at the situation or looks at problems is going to be universally beneficial. It's going to be beneficial in this dunya as well as beneficial in the akhirah. Now, coming back to our discussion about extraterrestrial life, right? Again, we have to understand that these are probable understandings. And without a lot of information, right? Just a 3-minute, or we didn't even watch the full 3 minutes, but a short video, many people come to the conclusion that, oh, it seems very possible. Extraterrestrial life is out there, right? Look at all the probability that's there. But again, the physicist that is speaking in the video, he's telling you that high possibility is there, right? But as a biologist, right, biologists will look at the same question and say, this is highly unlikely, right, that ETI exists, because so many factors play a part in the process of evolution for existence of life, and these terms seem very improbable, right? So even when we are looking at these truth statements, right, we would say that these statements are very dhanni, right? Okay, so moving forward, let's look at a case study, okay? So this is where we're kind of look at other aspects of this discussion, okay? So if we're looking at this discussion, right, looking at the question of ETI from the perspective of physics and statistics and astrobiology and all of that, what about the perspective of revelation, right? But before we get to that, what types of evidence was used in this video to explain this understanding of extraterrestrial intelligence or extraterrestrial life, right? You guys tell me which one. These are the 3 types of evidence that we have: rational, empirical, and revelatory. Which evidences was used in the video? Right? We have empirical, and how do we know what was the empirical information that was given to us? Right? Observation, right? Observation of the stars, and perhaps through telescopes and satellites and things like that. Right? The numbers that they're presenting, right? All empirical. But again, those numbers have to be observable, right? And then we also have rational, right? Like Sister Farhana mentioned, right? She mentioned that, it makes sense with all the probability, with as many, stars and planets and things that are out there, that rationally one could think that perhaps there could be life, right? So we've looked at rational as well as empirical evidences that is presented in the video, but there was no revelatory information presented in the video, right? So as Muslim scholars, and the muhaddithin in particular, they actually do what physicists and scientists do, right? They comb through a great deal of knowledge to come to certain understandings, okay? So let's see, what is there then any revelatory understanding, right? So when we're looking at even the rational, right, this would be in the realm of possibility, right? This is dhanni. And if we're looking at empirical, this would also be in the concept of dhanni, right? You're not certain about whether those numbers are correct or not, right? But if we had something that was revelatory, perhaps we can move from dhanni to qat'i, right? Because then we would know on some type of more sturdy terms. Well, let's see. Now, the one thing when we do look at revelatory texts, right, and revelatory understandings, looking through revelatory evidence is like looking at the stars. On a clear night, you're looking at the stars. And when you look at the stars closely and try to focus on just a set of stars, you see more stars in between those stars. And the further you look and the longer you look, the more stars you see. The same experience has been true when looking into the Quran. The source of revelatory text, right, or revelation or wahi, is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a pre-eternal, unlimited, never-ending being that is the source of all existence. Therefore, the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also unlimited in its scope. So looking into revelatory evidence in the same way you look at the stars, you will see an immense amount of vastness in these pieces of evidences, right? The longer and further you look into the Quran, the more meanings we can extract. So can we find anything regards to ETI in the Quran? Well, searching the Quran, we do find one verse, right? We do find one ayah in Surah At-Talaq, which says, "It is Allah who created the 7 heavens and the earth their like, the command descending down through all of them, so that you may know that Allah has power over all things, and that Allah encompasses all things in knowledge." So this is ayah number 12 of Surah At-Talaq. And in this ayah, we see the word mithlahunna, right? Mithlahunna literally means like similar to it, right? Similar like that. So what is the implications of this meaning, right? Similar to what and similar how, right? So is it 7 earths similar to 7 heavens? Is it similar to whatever is on this earth? Well, let's see. So there are multiple interpretations of this ayah, right? But there are 2 main interpretations that we see in the tafsir. One is that likeliness and complexity, right? Just like the heavens are complex, right? Similarly, the earth is complex, right? Have various components to it and things like that. And then there's the other main interpretation is that it's likeness in number, right? And this is actually the dominant opinion, that just like there are 7 heavens or 7 skies, there's also 7 earths. And this understanding is actually corroborated with another hadith, right? There's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that mentions, "O Allah, Lord of the 7 skies and what they shelter, Lord of the 7 earths and what they carry." And this hadith is actually mentioned in Bukhari. And so here, the plural of earth and 7 is explicitly mentioned in this hadith, right? So this hadith also suggests that there are other earths. So now that we've established that other earths exist, now we can actually consider, is there extraterrestrial life on those earths? So let's search further. Now, when we search further, we're looking into hadith. If we look into the hadith and see, is there any understanding of extraterrestrial life? We see that actually when Ibn Abbas was asked about this very verse in Surah Talaq, he commented on this verse and he said, "In each earth, there is the like of Ibrahim, alayhi salam." In another report of similar to this, Ibn Abbas, he said that 7 earths, in each earth, there is a prophet like your prophet, an Adam like your Adam, a Nuh like your Nuh, an Ibrahim like your Ibrahim, and an Isa like your Isa, alayhi wassalam, right? So he's presenting that there are similarities, right? Perhaps there might not be exactly like our prophets, right? Not like a multiverse or something like that, but the idea that there are some similarities. Now we have to look at the veracity of this claim, right? Whenever we hear hadith, first we need to actually verify its authenticity, right? And it's actually incumbent that whatever someone claims a report, especially attributing it to the Prophet ﷺ, we have to verify it. So this takes me to what we call hadith critical methodology, right? And actually there is in the curriculum materials a resource that is mentioned there, a supplemental resource that actually details hadith criticism, right? How hadith criticism works, some of the nuance within it, so that we teachers have that as a resource to help and explain this and understand it first for themselves, and then be able to express that to students as well. Now, we won't look into that in much detail. We'll look at one aspect of that, right? So one aspect that we'll look at is chain analysis, right? So again, the hadith methodology is very, very vast. We're only looking at one. So I understand that we're going to be leaving out quite a bit, and I'm mentioning that knowing that there are other resources for you guys to look at and to analyze, right? So we will only look at chain analysis, right? So the first question comes, who is saying this hadith, right? We mentioned that the Prophet ﷺ is not saying this. The Sahabi, Ibn Abbas is stating this, right? And who is Ibn Abbas? He is the top, the best mufassirin of the Quran, known to be the most knowledgeable about Quranic tafsir, okay? Now, when we look at hadith criticism, like I mentioned, there's a lot to look at, right? So looking at this list of things, there's the narrator, there's analysis of the narrator himself, right? Does he have a level of integrity and accuracy, which we just mentioned is Ibn Abbas, right? Whom the Prophet ﷺ mentioned specifically, right? And we know that he has the most knowledge about Quranic tafsir. Then we look at the chain analysis, right? That was this hadith from an uninterrupted chain, right? Were there breaks in between, right? It was narrated and there was a missing link there. Was it khabr wahid, meaning there's only one person who narrated it, right? And nobody else corroborated with him, right? So there's various things that we can mention there. And then there's additional measures that are looked at when looking at hadith is the absence of isolated discrepancies, right? So is there any specific note that's something that happened here that people have questions about, right? Or is there any other defects that are known in hadith and are they ascribed to this specific hadith as well, right? Now, when we're looking at these things, again, we need to keep in mind our understanding of qat'i and dhanni. Remember, qat'i, when something conclusive, it means that that text can only bear one meaning. There is no other interpretation of it. If you're saying from that text, we can get various meanings, right? Then we would say it's dhanni, right? It's probabilistic. Even the ayah that we mentioned about other earths is actually dhanni because of the fact there were multiple interpretations of that ayah, right? So something that I want to also mention to you guys very briefly, seeing that we're getting close to the end of the hour, is that there's this understanding of where has that information come from, and then what about the meaning of that text, right? So if the source is established, right, it's the Quran or mutawatir hadith, right, we would say that that's established as conclusive. But within those ayat, if the meaning is only one, right, there's no other way that we can look at it, we would say that both establishment as well as meaning is conclusive. But even in those ayat and those mutawatir hadith, if there are other interpretations, we will see the meaning is probabilistic, right? Now, if there's hadith that are lower grade, when we're referring to, for example, like Hasan hadith or anything lower than Sahih, we would then say that that understanding is going to be probabilistic in establishment, and perhaps even those hadith have only one meaning. Then we would say that the meaning is conclusive, right? And then if we're saying that any of those lower hadith are our established proof, right, that would be probabilistic, and that hadith would have multiple meanings, then even that meaning is probabilistic, right? So when we're looking at the ayah of multiple earths, it is conclusive in establishment, right, because it's from the Quran, but because it has multiple meanings, the meaning is probabilistic, right? So this number 2 position here, conclusive and probabilistic. And then looking at this hadith about multiple earths and about similarities of prophets and such things, both would be probabilistic. It is probabilistic in establishment as well as probabilistic in its meaning, right? So when we look at the evidences here, we're saying that this falls in the realm of probabilistic, of dhanni, okay? So when we look at this, we would try to understand it first and foremost on a literal sense and then figurative sense, right? So what can we get from this? We can say that there are other earths, perhaps the abode of jinn. Sister Farhana mentioned that as well, right? And what if those other earths are actually within this earth as well, right? So there's various ways of looking at it. There could also be every earth has a different intelligent species, right? A different understanding of that. And what intelligence species is, right? There could be a link between the realm of the unseen and the seen, right? The jinn we can't see, and they have a world of their own as well, right? And only the empirical is what we are able to see, right? So there's perhaps some understanding there, right? Perhaps these realms or these other earths, we just can't see them, even though they exist there, right? Perhaps even these prophets that are mentioned in the hadith are not like prophets in reality, but perhaps they're like representatives of prophets, right? Maybe they do the same thing that prophets do. They convey messages and warn like prophets do, right? Perhaps that these earths and prophets are real, but the details are only known to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that would be the only way that we can surely have some understanding of this, of extraterrestrial life or other earths. Now, a caveat of what we need to explain to our students, right? We need to, if you saw, a lot of this is uncertainty. So when we discuss these things with our students, we have to be able to make them comfortable with the possibility of any of these being true without certainty, right? So basically, we have to be comfortable with uncertainty. It's okay to not know for sure, right? Now, the levels of certainty that is needed is dependent on its intent, right? If the intention is to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like many of you have mentioned, right? To know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our creator, better through the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we can say we don't need a qat'i evidence, right? We can use probabilistic evidence to show how amazing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. Even the possibility that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could create so many different life forms allows us to awe at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? But if it's foundational question of belief, right, of our aqidah being addressed, then we do need qat'i evidence, right, as a necessity in order for us to believe in that, right? For example, finality of prophethood, right? It's an essential element of our belief, of our aqidah, and therefore we need qat'i evidence for that. But for other things, we don't necessarily need qat'i evidence, right? For probabilistic topics, the importance of the question is dependent on its weight in the hereafter, right? What are those akhirah implications, right? Then this then determines the level of importance in answering that question, right? So for example, if your student asks you about organ donation, well, perhaps organ donation does have an akhirah effect, right? That what will be the consequence of that action in the akhirah? But if the question is whether you believe that other planets exist or not, well, there's not much of an akhirah effect because it's not necessary for us to believe in that. It's not part of our necessary aqidah to believe in other planets existing. Does that make sense? Right? So when we're looking at what is certain in this discussion, right? So again, that does help to come back to what do we know, right? So we can look at the scholarly consensus is that the one thing, and I'm going to kind of just run through this very quickly, is that we know in qat'i terms that the best of all creation, without exception, is our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? And so on a scholarly consensus, everyone knows that this to be true. So that means even if there are aliens or extraterrestrial life, jinn, whatever it may be out there, and we know jinn obviously through qat'i terms exist, and malaika exist, and these and others. And so when we say that, we would say that better than all of those creations is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's something we know on qat'i terms, right? So again, it helps to bring students back to something that we do know in order to then help with that uncertainty as well, right? And we know the Prophet ﷺ to be like even humans, we could say, have a level above even jinn, even though we can't see them and they seemingly seem to be more powerful than us. But even Sulaiman alayhi salam, he subjugated jinn, right? We know that the Prophet ﷺ also subjugated jinn, right? And so the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose a human being to have the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then even the jinn came to our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam to gain that hidayah, it shows that we have that human beings, specifically the Prophet ﷺ, has an exceptional place and is better than all of creation, whether we find other creation or not. Okay. So again, we know what these things conclusively, and then everything else is going to be very probabilistic. Okay, so this is what I want us to understand from the scope of inquiry, to understand that this is going to be how we look at these specific terms. Now, the reason why I wanted to bring up Epicurus is that Epicurus has a very hedonistic concept, right? So I think most of us understand what hedonism is, right? It's very much talking about self-gratification, not worrying about the afterlife or what happens. Like those are all details that we don't need to think about. This is the kind of view that Epicurus had, right? So I'm just very quickly to understand this. But the reason why I bring that up is because, again, when we're questioning why do scientists ask the questions that they ask, the motivations are usually not spoken about, but you have to search for them. And when we look at those scientists who have actually developed ways of looking into space and actually who pursue this question of extraterrestrial life, many of those scientists are actually are consider themselves new Epicureans, right? So they have this Epicurus philosophy behind them, which is a very hedonistic understanding, right? And I'm overgeneralizing, but that becomes important, right? Because if you think about it and look at, we talked very briefly about numbers, right? And I mentioned that the cost can be an influencing aspect there too, right? So if you think about it, the US government actually spends $55 billion on space exploration every year. And if you think about what can we do with $54 billion, we can end world hunger. We around the world, right? We're not just talking about the United States, right? And we can even end homelessness in the United States specifically, right? Only with a portion, not even half of what the expenditure of space exploration is, right? So we think about where are we putting our resources and where are we getting these questions and why are we working towards answering them, right? And again, on a Islamic front, for us, the questions might be a little bit easier to answer, right? We can look at what is the worldly benefit and what is the akhirah benefit. And whenever we look at those two things, automatically we are benefiting the Muslims as well as the non-Muslims, right? But it takes that intentionality, that effort, and a lot of hard work in trying to pursue these novel inquiries, okay? So any questions on ETI and scientific inquiry? All right, I know that was a lot and I went quickly, so I apologize for that. But again, if there are any further questions, and as you're thinking about it as we get to the end, please feel free to ask, inshallah. Now, what I wanted to do is the last thing that I have on my agenda, inshallah, before I pass it back to Sister Shaza, is the epistemic framework, right? I had mentioned to you guys that worksheet that has this kind of outline on it. And basically what it does is it goes through those 5 fundamental questions that we talked about, right? So this curriculum, as an overview, is addressing these 5 essential fundamental questions about the human being that we all wonder about, right? And we've addressed each of these from a theological perspective as well as from a scientific perspective, right? So that way we can show the integration of both of these aspects. Now, what I wanted to do is briefly go through this, and perhaps I'll take 1 or 2 of these as an example, and then you guys can finish off this worksheet on your own and really look at how to examine all of these, right? So this is actually supposed to be, or is by intent to be, a summary activity, right? So you'll see here, you'll have the unit, the topic, and the big question that we addressed, and then it'll come with 3 principal propositions or judgments that we looked at in the course of that unit, right? And then we will ask students to then say, what would be the judgment claim here, right? Would this be a rational evidence? Would this be an empirical evidence? Or would this be a revelatory evidence in which helps us to understand the truth level of these statements, right? And then we'll look at that truth level, right? Is it qat'i or is it dhanni? Okay, so let's look at this first one as an example. So when we're looking at unit 2, we talked about human evolution and God's special creation, right? We talked about the origins of the human being. So this very first claim here says all biological life, including the human being, is connected to each other in terms of their origin through a lineage and common ancestry. Okay, so I'm going to ask all of you, what type of claim is this? What type of judgment? Is it revelatory, rational, or empirical? And we're going to have to make this rapid fire, guys. Ideas, thoughts. Okay, we have rational and empirical, right? So you're right? There's empirical because most of this judgment is based off of observances, right? Like we mentioned, right? Inductive observances, and then rational as well, right? Because what they did was they saw, well, this is the trend that we see, and so in their thought process, rationally, they thought, okay, well, we'll extend this understanding, right? Now, in terms of level of evidence, of certainty or uncertainty or probabilistic, what would we grade this claim? Would it be qat'i or dhanni? Absolutely, this would be dhanni, right? So this would be dhanni because, again, this is a probabilistic terms, right? There is no qat'i evidence that we have that shows that human origins are part of this lineage or common ancestry, right? Okay, let's take the next claim. The father of humankind, Adam alayhi salam, was a special creation of God and not a product of evolution. How do we know, what type of claim is this? How do we know this information? Absolutely, revelatory, right? So we know this from the Quran. This is revelatory evidence. Now, is that revelatory evidence? When we're grading that evidence, would it be dhanni or qat'i? So remember, revelatory evidence can be dhanni as well. Very good. This would be qat'i, right? Because we said there is no other interpretation of that ayah. We know that the Prophet mentioned, and it's in the Quran as well, that Adam alayhi salam is the father of mankind. He was a special creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so looking at this third one, there were pre-human beings on earth before Adam alayhi salam. What type of claim would this be? Okay, rational or empirical? This would actually be empirical, right? Because again, we're looking at observable understandings or observations, and we say that, well, we see things that are pre-human before Adam al-Islam would have come, right? We never said that they are connected to Adam al-Islam. This claim says there were pre-human beings on earth before Adam al-Islam, right? So we would have empirical evidences. Now, would that empirical evidences be qat'i or dhanni? Right, be probabilistic, right? Dhanni, right? That we're talking about pre-humans, right? Not necessarily humans, right? So it really thinks about how do we interpret these words as well, right? So now going on to the second part of this, the format of this worksheet, we see the question is now looking at all three of these claims. Is there overlap or is it conflict between these claims? What do you guys think? Do we see overlap, that all of these are kind of corroborated, they can fit together nicely, or even just if we put a little bit of effort, we can put these all together? Or is there conflict between these? Right, we see conflict, right? Which ones do we see conflict between? 1, 2, and 3, 2 and 3, 1 and 2, 1 and 3. Right, the conflict of common ancestry and Adam and Islam being our father, right? So we see that there's conflict between 1 and 2, and then there's also conflict between 2 and 3, right? So if we're saying, if we take pre-human to be human also, then we're saying, well, how can there be human beings before Adam and Islam? Adam and Islam is the first human being, right? So then we look at how do we resolve this, right? So this is a great exercise for students to be able to see that, can this kind of understanding be resolved or can it not be resolved? And we should be okay with that, right? So we see here that there's difference among the specialists in interpreting that evidence from an empirical form, right? So can we coincide, or can we resolve conflict 1 and 2? Probably not, right? Because these are completely different understandings, right? Can we resolve 2 and 3? Well, we looked at a few other understandings of how we can say Adam and Islam have come, and we see some sort of ancestry connection. But again, that would be a stretch, right? So we would say that there's a lot of differences between these propositions, and therefore, most likely, and we see in some that absolutely, there is not a way to resolve those understandings. Okay. Does that make sense how we're going through this worksheet? Okay. All right. Alhamdulillah. Okay. So because of the fact that we're almost done with our 75 minutes that I have been given, we'll go ahead and stop there. But what I would like you guys to do is that I would like you guys to work through this worksheet, right? I want you guys to be able to see how this worksheet is, again, from your understanding. And then in the resources, you will find that there is an answer sheet, obviously, for the instructor, so that way they have the actual what would this be, and have the answers, right, sort of say in front of you. And so we'll be able to look at and compare what was your understanding as well, right? And this is how we would give to the students as well, right? Now, the question that I have for all of you that I'd like you guys to mention is that the way that we looked at it as curriculum developers is that we thought this would be best to be placed in the beginning before any of the units, so that the teacher can look at it and see how they want to use this format, right? Do they want to use this as at the end of every unit, there's a recap, and then we say, okay, fill out the first portion, right? And then when they're done with unit 3, they fill out the second portion as a recap or as a summary, right? Or as homework, so that way students can grapple with this understanding and then come back and discuss it in the classroom, right? So there's multiple ways of looking at this. So we as curriculum developers thought it would be best to place it in the beginning. But since this is a summary activity, right, it makes sense for us to place it at the end, right? After all of the units are completed, now looking back at all of those units and summarizing those units, let's go through this activity, right? So as teachers, right, and experienced in your field, I would like to ask you guys, in the chat, put beginning or end. If you vote or you think from your experience, would this be a document that would be best to place in the beginning before all of the units are mentioned? Or would it be best to place this at the end, right? Strategically, or even the way that it makes sense. And I hope I haven't influenced your decision because I've placed it at the end, right? I've only placed it at the end because we had no time to in the middle. Okay, so we've got majority votes for end, but we do have a vote for the beginning as well. Okay, so we can use it in both ways, right? So we do have an explanation of how this document can be used, right? In multiple ways and different ways of looking at it, right? Different forms of discussions that you can have, right? Can it be small group discussions? It can be a full class discussions. You can divide up the classroom at the end into different groups, right? You cover unit 2, unit 3, unit 4, 5, and 6, and then come together as a classroom and discuss it, right? So there's a lot of ways of looking at it. But that's interesting. I just wanted to see what kind of to settle our own internal kind of discussion about it, of how we viewed it, is that we thought it would be, we have it, if you guys have looked at the website, we have it placed at the beginning, just so that way the teacher is aware that they can use it however they want, right? So that way they're not kind of caught off guard at the end, like, oh, hey, I wish I had this in the beginning, so I could have incorporated it within the units. So that's how we looked at it. But I see that many of you guys have multiple understandings as well. And the end seems to be kind of the consensus. So inshallah, I'll present that to the rest of the team, inshallah. So jazakallah khair to all of you. So just if you guys are wondering, right, those are the answers. And I had that there as well, if we had time to cover in all of these. But I will turn it now to Sister Shaza to discuss those other elements and to wrap it up. But on my part, I'd like to say Jazakallah khair to all of you for attending, for being patient with me. I apologize if I've been kind of incoherent today, but I really appreciate all of you sticking with me, listening to me talk on and on. And I hope and pray, inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this beneficial to all of you, make it be a sadaqah jariyah to all of us, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us to implement and give us the tawfiq to implement it appropriately and correctly so that way our students can benefit. And inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make this a benefit to the ummah as well. Jazakallah khair on my part. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa atubu ilaik. And again, on my part, I also would like to apologize if there are any excesses and shortcomings. That may all of you guys please forgive me for those. So, Sister Shaza, back to you.
All right, Jazakallah khairan. Thank you so much to all of you, and in particular our instructor, Sister Aisha Bassett. It's been really a pleasure to learn from you, mashallah. I wanted to probably just ask you to stay for another 5 minutes, inshallah. I want to share with you information about the next stage of the support that we're able to provide. Grateful for the grant funding that allows for this, inshallah. And of course, the team of educators and scholars and experts who have made this possible, and of course, yourselves. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the next stage of our of this grant and the support that we're able to provide in helping you, inshallah, do the best possible job that you can in implementing this in your classroom is to be able to provide a virtual professional learning community. Alhamdulillah, this is something that we really enjoy doing at the Islamic Schools League of America, where we kind of gather educators who are interested in a key topic or maybe share the same kind of quote unquote role identity as science teachers or teachers who are teaching science. And we gather together at a regular cadence and engage in open conversation about the challenges that we're facing. And it's through the exchange of the problems and the challenges and also solutions from others in the PLC that we're all able to learn and grow. So inshallah, we really see this as an opportunity for us to benefit from each other. You all may be very seasoned educators and have a lot to offer, but you may be struggling with one or two students and their engagement or a content topic that right now you didn't have the opportunity to really kind of, foreshadow that that's going to be something that happens. But inshallah, when you're teaching it, that's something that arises. So we hope that this PLC would be able to support you. And as I mentioned, perhaps you found this to be very beneficial and it's something that you want a colleague in your own school or in other schools to know about and to teach, inshallah. I know for myself, I've told those who I know that I would like to see this taught in all of our Islamic high schools. I feel like it provides such a paradigm shift for our own students. I have my own children are 11th and going into 11th and 10th grade. And, by this time in their Islamic schooling experience, they might be kind of checking out from things that are really grounded in an Islamic framework. Not that they've been afforded the opportunity to have that much experience with it. I feel like this would be something that would really energize them and bring kind of the light and enthusiasm of Islam back into their hearts and inshallah. So if you share that sentiment, inshallah, and want to share this with others, I encourage you to please let them know about the PLC. And I'm going to go ahead and place in the chat the place where you can sign up for the PLCs, inshallah. There is a discount code for you so that while it is a $50 ticket for individuals, which is being subsidized through this grant, mashallah, you would only be paying $25 with the discount code alumni, spelled just that way with capital A, and then all the rest are lowercase. So inshallah, if you'd like to do that, we'll host free live sessions, 4 live sessions, where we'll all get together and have a little bit of a, touch point on the curriculum again, as well as have some semi-structured discussion opportunity for breakout rooms. And in addition to the live sessions, we'll also have the WhatsApp group. So it's up to you if you want to participate in the live sessions, you just want to take advantage of that WhatsApp group where experts and curriculum developers are present for you to ask questions as you're engaged in the implementation phase. That's totally up to you, how you want to take advantage of this, but this is a support that we want to provide. And of course, for those who are just going to be entering and they weren't able to participate in this PD, in these PD workshops, when they register for this, they will also receive the recordings of these PD workshops. So inshallah, we hope that they'll be able to catch up before they have to teach it. So that's about the PLC. Does anyone have any questions about the PLC? The discount code, type it right here. It's alumni. So super, super affordable, inshallah. Thanks to it being subsidized through the grant, alhamdulillah. We hope that inshallah we'll see you all as you participate, as you go on to the next journey of this curriculum, inshallah. I'm afraid that what I said might have flavored a little bit of your own feedback. I should have probably started with this, but here is the survey, the concluding survey, and the chat message that I just sent also includes a link to the ISLA PD end of workshop survey, that second link right there. I'll copy it again and put it here. I'm asking for you to all please stay on until you complete the survey. This survey is going to allow us to generate certificates of completion for you. So it does ask for some identifying information, which I know isn't a common practice in feedback forms. However, we at ISLA will be the ones who will be handling and analyzing the surveys. So we will disaggregate the data such that we are using the personal identifying information just to be able to generate those certificates of completion. And we will also be providing your information to the grant team so that we can fulfill a grant deliverable about a stakeholder database where they just want to know, like, where were the people who were engaging with this coming from, which states, and so that helps them identify what was the impact of this grant. But we will disaggregate the data before we share any of your feedback back with the instructors. So please, please, please do not hesitate to be honest. The survey has about 12 questions that you must answer, required questions. And then there's about 4 or 5 open-ended questions, which are all optional. So I hope that you can do that. I'm going to actually go onto that screen as soon as I'm done sharing my screen and thank each of you for completing that so that we can acknowledge that you have done that. And then the last thing I want to say before, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting you as you're engaged in that survey, I do want to share that, alhamdulillah, at ISLA, we do provide a lot of different professional development opportunities. We will be continuing with different topic PLCs as well. So please do stay in touch. Inshallah, go onto our website and sign up to receive information and updates about what we do. We have a week-long PD week called ISLA PDW. It's the 3rd year that we're offering this, where we have 10 sessions for one registration cost from amazing educators who have a lot of experience. And we hope to continue to instill and promote this Islamic worldview through all of these different topics that we're doing. So inshallah, we hope that you can join us there as well. Registration does end tomorrow because PDW starts next week on Monday, and we'd like to provide everybody with enough time to register for their Zoom links and be prepared. So with that, I will conclude my talk. I think Rauda, if she's still on, I would love for Rauda to drop the link again for you to sign up to receive email updates about the curriculum itself. Because of course, you've joined this amazing group to learn about this curriculum, and you may be interested in receiving updates about that. So with that, I will stop speaking. I invite you all to, unmute or to chat in the chat box if you have any additional questions or concerns or any other comments you want to make.